Imagine this. It's a warm spring evening in the year 1282, in the city of Palermo on the island of Sicily. Bells are ringing for evening prayers. Families are gathering near a small church. It looks like a peaceful, ordinary day. In less than a few hours, thousands of people will be dead. And it will all start with one woman and one soldier. Hi everyone. Today I'm going to tell you the story of the Sicilian Vespers, a brutal uprising that exploded suddenly, just like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in France, and completely changed the political map of the Mediterranean. This is not just a story about violence. It's a story about long, stored anger, foreign rule, humiliation, and the moment when people finally snap. To understand what happened on that evening, we need to start a bit earlier. In the 13th century, Sicily was like a prize in a long game between powerful rulers. For many years, it had been ruled by a dynasty connected to the Holy Roman Empire. But then the French Prince Charles of Anjou, brother of the King of France, took control of the island. At first, this might have looked like just another change of rulers. But for the Sicilians, it slowly turned into a nightmare. Charles of Anjou didn't live in Sicily. His main focus was his own power and his wars. To keep control of the island, he filled it with French officials and soldiers. These men collected heavy taxes. They treated the local people with arrogance and contempt. To them, Sicily was not a home. It was a source of money. Ordinary Sicilians felt the difference immediately. New taxes, new laws, new people in power who didn't speak their language, didn't respect their customs, and often abused their positions. Over time, anger grew. The islanders saw the French as occupiers, not protectors. There were complaints of corruption, extortion, and, most dangerously, insults to local women and families. Everyone knew it was bad, but no one knew when or how it would explode. Now let's go back to Easter Monday, March 30th, 1282. In the suburbs of Palermo, near the Church of the Holy Spirit, people are gathering for evening prayers, for Vespers, the evening service. This is a time when families are together, dressed in their best clothes, trying to enjoy the holiday. Among the crowd are French soldiers, on patrol. They claim they are there for security. The locals feel they are there to remind everyone who is boss. And then it happens. According to the most famous version of the story, one French soldier approaches a Sicilian woman. He says he wants to search her for weapons. But it doesn't look like a professional search. It looks like harassment. Her husband, or, in some versions, her fiancé or relative, sees this. Imagine the moment. The public humiliation, the fear, the anger, the years of tension with the French boiling in his chest. He snaps. He pulls out a knife and kills the soldier on the spot. For 1 second, the square freezes. Then everything breaks. The crowd erupts. People attack the other French soldiers nearby. Knives, stones, whatever they can find. The soldiers are completely shocked. They did not expect resistance, especially not here, in a crowd of unarmed civilians. But this is not a random fight. It's like a fire waiting for a spark. The spark has been lit. Word spreads through Palermo. The French are being killed. And almost immediately, another sentence follows. Now is our chance. Groups of Sicilians begin moving through the streets, hunting down French soldiers, officials, and even French settlers. Homes are broken into. People are dragged out and killed in the streets. It is not a controlled rebellion led by one general. It is a mass uprising, driven by rage and a desire for revenge. One of the most chilling details from this event is the language test. How do you know who is French and who is Sicilian in a chaotic city? You can't ask for a passport. You can't check an ID. But you can test a person's tongue. People began using a word in the local dialect, Sicily, which means chickpeas. For native Sicilians, this word was easy, natural. For French speakers, the sounds were difficult to pronounce correctly, so they would force suspects to say it. If the pronunciation sounded foreign, if they said it wrong, that person could be killed on the spot. Just like St. Bartholomew's Night in Paris, where Catholics hunted Protestants in a frenzy of religious hatred, here in Palermo, a whole group of people was targeted and killed based on identity, on who they were, not what they had done. By the end of the night, the streets of Palermo were covered in blood. But the violence didn't stop there. News of the uprising in Palermo traveled quickly across Sicily. And in city after city, town after town, the same pattern repeated. Sicilians rose up, attacked French garrisons, and drove out or killed the representatives of Charles of Anjou. On one level, this was a wild, emotional revenge. On another level, it was a political revolution. The Sicilians were not just killing French people because of hatred. They were sending a message. We will not live under French rule anymore. Of course, Charles of Anjou did not accept this calmly. He saw Sicily as his territory and his base for future campaigns. Losing the island was not an option. What started as a sudden uprising turned into a long and complicated conflict known as the War of the Sicilian Vespers. Now the story moves beyond Sicily. The islanders needed protection and a new ruler. They turned to Peter III of Aragon, a powerful king from the Iberian Peninsula who had family ties to the old Sicilian dynasty. With his help, Sicily passed under Aragonese control. Charles of Anjou fought to take it back, but failed. This one eruption of anger during Vespers led to decades of war between different kingdoms. The struggle over Sicily drew in the papacy, the kings of Aragon, the Kingdom of Naples, and other European powers. On the map, it looked like crowns and coats of arms moving around. On the ground, it meant armies landing on the island, sieges, battles, and more deaths. So why is the Sicilian Vespers so important? First, it marks the collapse of French Angevin power in Sicily. Charles of Anjou's dream of a Mediterranean empire was basically destroyed. Sicily slipped permanently from French control. Second, it changed the balance of power in the region. From this moment, the crown of Aragon, a Catalan Aragonese power, became a major player in the central Mediterranean. Later, this would be part of the foundation of what we know as Spanish power in the region. Third, it became a symbol. For some, the Sicilian Vespers is remembered as a heroic national uprising against foreign oppressors, a moment when ordinary people had enough and said no more. For others, it is remembered as an example of how quickly hatred can become mass murder and how easily a crowd can turn into a weapon. Let's compare it briefly to St. Bartholomew's Night, which you might already know. St. Bartholomew's Day massacre happened later, in 1572, in France. On that night, thousands of Protestants were murdered by Catholics in Paris and other cities. Like the Sicilian Vespers, it was sudden, shocking, and incredibly bloody. But there is a difference in flavor. In St. Bartholomew's Night, a lot of the killing was encouraged or allowed by those in power. It was a top-down massacre mixed with religious conflict and political intrigue. In the Sicilian Vespers, the violence started from below, from the people. It was a bottom-up explosion against a hated ruling class. In both cases, though, once the killing started, it spread like fire. Fear, revenge, and group identity took over. One more interesting point. There is still debate among historians about how spontaneous the Sicilian Vespers really was. Some think it was a completely emotional reaction to that moment in front of the church, a true spark in a powder keg. Others suspect that there were already secret plans, contacts with Aragon, and that certain noble families were ready to use any opportunity to start a revolt. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Yes, there were deep political currents and outside players ready to jump in. But without the daily humiliation, the heavy taxes, the abuse of power, and that one moment of public outrage, nothing might have happened. It's a reminder that big historical events often begin with small, very human moments, a shove, an insult, a slap, or, in this case, a soldier putting his hands where he shouldn't. So, what can we take from the story of the Sicilian Vespers today? First, it shows us that oppression is never free. You can rule people by fear only for so long. The anger builds quietly. People get used to swallowing humiliation until one day they don't. Second, it's a warning about dehumanizing outsiders. On Sicily, a whole group, the French, became the face of everything people hated. Once you reduce a human being to a label, it becomes much easier to justify violence against them. Third, it reminds us how fragile normal life is. On that Easter Monday, people went to church like always. No one had "today I will join a revolution" in their calendar. But history rarely asks for an appointment. It just arrives. So next time you hear the bells of a church in an old European city, remember Palermo in 1282. A woman being humiliated, a man pulling a knife, a single act of resistance, and from it, a chain reaction that shook kingdoms, redrew borders, and entered history under one quiet, almost peaceful name. the Sicilian Vespers. If you enjoyed this story and want more dark, dramatic episodes from history, events like the Sicilian Vespers or St. Bartholomew's Night, let me know in the comments, and I'll dive into the next one.